Little girl calls her mum's first contact. A millionaire answers. What she says changes everything. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A wonderful piece of news will reach you soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The mahogany boardroom of Crawford Industries fell silent as James Crawford's phone buzzed against the polished table. At 40, he commanded respect with his sharp jawline, steel-grey eyes, and the kind of presence that made million-dollar deals happen with a handshake. The late-night emergency meeting about the Shanghai acquisition was reaching its climax when the unknown number flashed on his screen. "Take 5, gentlemen," James said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. His executives shuffled papers as he stepped toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. "Crawford Industries," he answered, expecting another panicked call from Tokyo about market fluctuations. Instead, a small, trembling voice broke through the static. "Papai, Daddy." James froze. The word hit him like a physical blow. His reflection in the window showed a man who'd never married, never had children, never even considered the possibility of someone calling him that sacred word. I think you have the wrong number, sweetheart," he managed, his usual commanding tone softening involuntarily. "Please don't hang up." "Don't." The desperation in the child's voice was raw, heartbreaking. "I found your number in Mommy's work phone. She said if we were ever really, really scared and she couldn't help us, we should call this number and say that word. She said you'd understand how serious things were." James's chest tightened. Through the phone, he could hear muffled sobs in the background, multiple children crying softly. "What's your name, honey?" "Madison. I'm almost 11, and my twin sisters Zoe and Mia are 7. Mommy came home from her night cleaning job this morning, but she collapsed and won't wake up properly. We don't have any food left, not even the stale bread from 2 days ago." "Where are you, Madison?" James found himself moving away from the boardroom, his business deal suddenly seeming insignificant. "I don't know the exact address. We live in the apartment above the old bakery that closed down. The windows are boarded up, and there's a big crack in the wall where the rain comes in." The description painted a picture of poverty that existed just miles from James's penthouse, yet felt like a different universe. "Madison, is your mommy there? Can I talk to her? She's breathing, but she just moans when I try to wake her. I'm scared something's really wrong, but I don't know any doctors or anybody else to call. Mommy always said this number was only for emergencies, and this feels like an emergency." James closed his eyes, processing what he'd heard. A mother who'd given her daughter his number for emergencies. A child who'd been taught to call him Daddy as some kind of code. None of it made sense, but the desperation in Madison's voice was real. "Madison, honey, I need you to tell me something important. What's your mommy's name?" "Rachel Martinez, but that's her married name. Before she married my stepdad, her name was different. I think it was Rachel Santos." The name Santos hit James like lightning. 11 years ago. Rachel Santos, the woman with warm brown eyes and a laugh that could light up entire rooms. The woman who'd cleaned the evening shift at Crawford Industries, who'd always smiled when she emptied his trash can during his late nights at the office. The woman who'd disappeared from his life without explanation after they'd spent 6 months finding excuses to talk to each other, sharing coffee in empty hallways, and falling in love despite the differences in their worlds. "Madison," his voice cracked slightly, "what does your mommy look like?" "She has long brown hair, but it's not shiny anymore. And she has pretty eyes that used to smile a lot, but now they look sad all the time. She's 37, and she works cleaning offices at night when she's not too sick. She used to work at a really tall building downtown before we moved here." James's hand trembled against the phone. "Rachel Santos, now Martinez. The woman he'd searched for desperately 11 years ago, who'd vanished right around the time his security chief had recommended tightening protocol around executive floors due to industrial espionage concerns. He'd always wondered if that had something to do with her sudden departure. "Madison, sweetie, I need you to do something very important for me. Try to wake up your mommy again. Tell her that James Crawford is on the phone and that I'm coming to help." "You know my mommy?" Before James could answer, he heard shuffling, then Madison's voice becoming distant. "Mommy, wake up. There's a man on the phone who says he knows you. His name is James Crawford." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a sharp intake of breath and Rachel's voice, weak but unmistakably hers. "Give me the phone. Right now." James waited, his heart pounding as he heard whispered conversation, footsteps, and finally Rachel's voice, hoarse but filled with shock and something that sounded like panic. "James? Is it really you?" "Rachel." The name came out like a prayer. "My God, Rachel, I looked for you. After you stopped showing up for work, I tried to find you, but you just vanished." Her voice broke. "James, I can't do this conversation right now. Madison shouldn't have called you. We'll figure something else out." "Figure what out?" "Rachel, 3 children called me for help because their mother is unconscious and they have no food. I don't care what happened between us 11 years ago. I care about making sure those little girls are safe tonight." Through the phone, he heard Madison's voice. "Mommy, is the man really coming? Will he bring medicine to make you feel better?" Rachel's sigh was heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "James, this isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not, but I'm making it my responsibility. Give me your address." "You don't understand. Things are complicated. Madison, she—" Rachel's voice trailed off, and James heard her sharp intake of breath. "Oh, God, what has she been told to call you?" "She called me Daddy. Rachel, is there something you need to tell me?" The silence stretched so long James thought the call had dropped. Finally Rachel whispered, 1247 Bleecker Street, apartment 3B, above the old Giovanni's bakery. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Rachel?" "Yes, we're going to talk about everything." As James hung up, his hands shook. His reflection in the window showed a man transformed, no longer just a successful CEO, but someone about to face a past he'd never fully understood and a future he couldn't have imagined. He turned back to the boardroom where his executives waited. "Gentlemen, we're postponing this meeting indefinitely. Cancel everything on my schedule for tomorrow." "Sir, the Shanghai deal." "We'll wait." James grabbed his coat, his mind racing with questions that had no easy answers. Rachel Santos, who'd become Rachel Martinez, a child who'd been taught to call him Daddy in emergencies. And most importantly, the math that was becoming clearer by the second. 11 years ago, Madison almost 11 now. As his private elevator descended toward the garage, James Crawford realized his carefully controlled world was about to change forever. The only question was whether he was ready for the truth he might find waiting in apartment 3B. The Mercedes S-Class felt absurdly out of place as James navigated the narrow, pothole-filled streets of Rachel's neighborhood. 40 minutes earlier, he'd been discussing multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. Now, he was driving through an area that reminded him why he'd worked so hard to escape his own humble beginnings. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on buildings that looked like they were holding each other up through sheer determination. 1247, Bleecker Street stood before him like a monument to broken dreams. The Giovanni's bakery sign hung at an angle, several letters missing, paint peeling in long strips. The boarded windows were covered in graffiti, and the smell of stale garbage mixed with something he couldn't identify. Poverty, maybe, or simply neglect. James sat in his car for a moment, his mind racing back to 11 years ago. Rachel Santos had been different from other employees at Crawford Industries. While most of the evening cleaning crew avoided eye contact with executives, Rachel had always smiled and wished him a good evening. Their conversations had started small, comments about the weather, questions about whether he needed his trash can emptied. But gradually, those brief exchanges had become the highlight of his 18-hour days. Rachel was studying business part-time, working the cleaning job to pay for classes. She was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly unimpressed by his title or his family's money. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, Rachel had seemed to want only his company. Their relationship had been conducted in stolen moments. Conversations in empty hallways, shared coffee in the building's 24-hour lobby, and eventually a few carefully planned dinners at restaurants far from his usual circles. James had known his father would disapprove, but for the first time in his life, he'd been willing to risk family expectations for personal happiness. Then one night, Rachel simply didn't show up for work. Her supervisor said she'd called in, claiming a family emergency. When she didn't appear the following night, or the night after that, James had tried to find her, but Rachel Santos had vanished completely. No forwarding address, no contact information beyond the employee file that listed an apartment that was empty by the time he'd arrived there. He'd hired private investigators, but they'd found no trace of Rachel Santos in New York or the surrounding states. After 6 months of searching, James had forced himself to accept that she'd chosen to disappear, probably deciding that a relationship with her boss was too complicated to maintain. Now, staring up at the crumbling building, James felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. He grabbed the bags of groceries he'd hastily purchased from the 24-hour market, enough food to feed a family for weeks, and headed toward the unmarked door beside the boarded bakery front. The stairwell reeked of mildew and something worse. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, and several steps creaked ominously under his weight. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, his expensive shoes were covered in a layer of grime he preferred not to examine too closely. Apartment 3B's door was scarred with scratches and dents. The number 3 hung upside down, held by a single bent nail. James knocked softly, not wanting to wake the neighbors but desperately needing to see Rachel again. The door opened a crack, revealing a chain lock and a pair of large blue eyes peering up at him. "Are you James?" The voice was small but brave. "You must be Madison." James knelt down to be at eye level with the crack in the door. "I brought food and some medicine for your mum, sweetheart." "Hold on." Madison's voice was mature beyond her years as she called over her shoulder, "Mummy, he's here." The chain rattled and the door swung open. Madison was smaller than James had imagined from her mature phone conversation, painfully thin, with dirty blonde hair that needed washing and clothes that were too small for her growing frame. But her eyes held an intelligence and responsibility that shouldn't have existed in someone not yet 11. "Thank you for coming," she said with the solemn politeness of a child forced to grow up too fast. "Zoe and Mia are with Mommy. She's awake now, but she's still really weak." James stepped into the apartment and his heart broke. The space was tiny, a single room that served as bedroom, living room and kitchen. A fold-out couch dominated one wall, where 2 small forms were curled against a woman James almost didn't recognize. The kitchenette consisted of a hot plate, a mini-fridge that hummed loudly, and a sink with a persistent drip. The walls were stained with water damage, and the single window was covered with a sheet instead of curtains. But what struck him most was how clean everything was. Despite the poverty, despite the failing infrastructure, someone had maintained what dignity they could. The few possessions they owned were neatly arranged, and the apartment smelled of generic disinfectant rather than despair. "James!" He turned toward the voice and felt time collapse. Rachel sat on the couch, wearing scrubs that had seen better days, cradling 2 sleeping children against her sides. At 37, she was still beautiful, but life had carved lines around her eyes and added a thinness to her face that spoke of too many missed meals. Her hair, once glossy and full, was pulled back in a practical ponytail that couldn't hide its brittleness, but her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 11 years, were exactly as he remembered, except now they held a wariness that cut him to the core. Rachel. He set the grocery bags on the small table, including the fever reducer and vitamins he'd grabbed at the pharmacy. My God, it really is you. I look different, I know. She wrapped her arms around the sleeping twins defensively. 11 years and 3 children will do that. You look. James paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound condescending. You look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders. Madison had begun unpacking the groceries with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, though James noticed her hands shook slightly as she pulled out items they probably hadn't seen in months: fresh fruit, real meat, milk that wasn't about to expire. Madison, why don't you put some of this food away quietly, so we don't wake your sisters, Rachel said gently. Mr. Crawford and I need to talk. As Madison moved efficiently around the tiny kitchenette, James caught Rachel's arm gently. It's still James, and we definitely need to talk. I know what you're thinking, Rachel said quietly, her eyes darting to Madison and back. The timeline, the math. Yes, James, Madison is your daughter. The words he'd been expecting still knocked the breath from his lungs. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was 26 years old, in love with a man whose father had already made it clear I was unsuitable for his heir, and pregnant with a child that would have destroyed everything you'd worked for. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. Your father's security chief approached me the week I found out I was pregnant. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. What did he say? That there were concerns about security breaches from cleaning staff who had developed inappropriate relationships with executives, that my employment was being terminated immediately for protocol violations, and that if I tried to contact you or make any claims about personal relationships, they had documentation that could make my life very difficult. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. His father's interference, the mysterious disappearance, Rachel's sudden departure, it all made horrible sense now. So you just left, without giving me a choice. I gave you the only choice that protected both of us. I changed my last name back to my mother's maiden name, took the savings I had and moved to Brooklyn. I planned to raise Madison alone and let you have the life your family wanted for you. And you never thought to contact me? Not once in 11 years? Rachel was quiet for a long moment, watching Madison arrange items in the tiny refrigerator. I thought about it every day for the first year, but then I met David Martinez. He was a good man, James. A paramedic who knew I had a daughter and didn't care about who her father was. He married me, adopted Madison legally, gave us his name and his love. What happened to him? Cancer. Diagnosed when the twins were 18 months old, gone 8 months later. No life insurance that covered his condition. Medical bills that ate through everything we'd saved. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Madison was only 4, but she remembers him. He's the only father she's ever known. James processed this information, trying to reconcile the Rachel he'd known with the woman who'd endured so much. But you kept my number. You taught Madison to call me. Rachel looked embarrassed. I work for a building maintenance company now. Different buildings, different shifts. About 3 years ago, I was assigned to Crawford Industries for their weekend deep cleaning rotation. I saw your name on the directory, saw you had the same office. I updated your contact information from the company directory. You've been cleaning my building for 3 years. Weekend, overnight shifts. You're never there on weekends. But I kept thinking, what if something happened to me? What if the girls had no one? So I taught Madison about the emergency number, told her it was only if things were really, really bad and she had no other choice. But why teach her to call me Daddy? Because I knew if a strange child just called you asking for help, you might think it was a prank or a scam. But if she said that word... Rachel's voice broke slightly. I knew it would get your attention long enough for you to listen. Madison had finished with the groceries and was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, clearly listening to every word, despite pretending to be occupied with a worn coloring book. Madison, James said gently, can you look at me for a minute? She raised her eyes, blue-grey eyes that were unmistakably his own, set in a face that was a feminine version of his childhood photographs. Your mom is right. I am your biological father. But I didn't know about you until tonight. If I had known, would you have wanted me? The question was asked with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who'd learned not to expect too much from adults. The question hit James like a hammer blow. Madison, I would have moved heaven and earth to be part of your life. I've spent 11 years wondering what happened to your mom, wishing I could find her again. But you have an important job. Mommy says you're very busy and very successful. I am busy, but being successful doesn't matter if you don't have people to share it with. James moved closer, still keeping a respectful distance. Madison, I know this is all very confusing and scary, but I want you to know that from now on, you and your sisters and your mom are going to be safe. You're never going to go hungry again. And you're never going to have to be afraid. Even Zoe and Mia, even though they're not your real daughters. James glanced at the sleeping twins, their small faces peaceful against Rachel's sides. Even Zoe and Mia. Family isn't just about blood, Madison. It's about choosing to love and take care of each other. One of the twins stirred, opening sleepy blue eyes and staring at the stranger in their apartment with curiosity rather than fear. Are you the food man? She whispered. I'm James, he said softly, and yes, I brought food. Are you Zoe or Mia? I'm Mia. Zoe has a scar on her chin from when she fell off the playground. She pointed to her sister, who was still sleeping. Are you going to stay and take care of us? The innocent question hung in the air. Rachel tensed, clearly prepared to intervene, but James answered honestly. I'm going to make sure you're all taken care of, but there's a lot we need to figure out first. Grown-up stuff. Yes, grown-up stuff. Mia nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Mommy does a lot of grown-up stuff. Sometimes she cries when she thinks we're sleeping, but then she makes us breakfast and pretends everything's okay. Rachel's face flushed with embarrassment. Mia, that's enough. But James was looking at Rachel with new understanding. How long has it been this bad? Define bad, Rachel said defensively. Rachel. She was quiet for a long moment. 2 years, maybe 3. The rent keeps going up, but the work doesn't pay more. I've been working 60 hours a week just to keep us housed and fed. Sometimes I have to choose between groceries and electricity. And you never thought to call me? And say what? Hi, James. Remember me from 11 years ago? I have your daughter and she's hungry. What if you'd hung up? What if you'd decided Madison was better off somewhere else? What if you'd tried to take her away from me? The fear in her voice was real, raw, and it broke something inside James's chest. He understood now why she'd stayed away, why she'd taught Madison to call only in the most desperate circumstances. Rachel, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly. I would never take Madison away from you. You're her mother. You've raised her, sacrificed for her, kept her safe. But I also won't let any of you struggle like this anymore. We're going to figure this out together. James, I can't just accept charity. It's not charity. Madison is my daughter. That makes you family, and that makes Zoe and Mia my family too. Taking care of family isn't charity, it's responsibility. As if summoned by their conversation, Madison looked up from her coloring book. Are you going to live with us now? or are we going to live with you? The question was simple, but the answer would change all of their lives forever. James looked around the tiny apartment, at the water stains on the ceiling, the boarded-up windows, the sounds of domestic violence coming from neighboring units. Then he looked at Rachel, exhausted and proud, and still the most beautiful woman he'd ever known, and at 3 little girls who deserved so much more than this. "We're going to figure that out," he said finally. "But first, we're going to make sure everyone is safe and healthy and has enough food." Madison nodded as if this was a reasonable adult answer, but her next question caught him completely off guard. "Are you going to marry Mommy?" Rachel's face went white. "Madison!" "I'm just asking, because on TV, when daddies come back, they usually marry the mommies, and then everyone lives happily ever after." James felt his heart racing. "Madison, life is more complicated than TV shows. Your mom and I, we have a lot of things to work through first. But you still love her, right? Because you came when we needed you, and Mommy's eyes look different when she looks at you." Out of the mouths of babes. James glanced at Rachel, who was studying her hands with intense concentration. "Madison, sometimes grown-ups need time to figure out their feelings," he said carefully. "That's okay," Madison said with the wisdom of someone far older than her almost 11 years. "But I think you should know that Mommy kept a picture of you in her jewelry box. And sometimes, when she thought we weren't looking, she would take it out and look at it and get sad." Rachel's face turned bright red. "Madison, that's enough questions for tonight." But as James processed what Madison had said, he realized that whatever else had happened in the past 11 years, Rachel had never completely let go of what they'd had together, just as he had never stopped wondering what might have been. The revelation changed something in the air between them, a possibility that hadn't existed moments before. "Right now," James said, standing up, "what matters is getting you all somewhere safe and making sure Rachel gets the medical attention she clearly needs. I'm fine. You collapsed from exhaustion and haven't eaten a proper meal in who knows how long. You're not fine." James's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm taking all of you to my place tonight. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out the rest. James, we can't just move into your penthouse." "Why not?" "Because..." Rachel struggled to find words. "Because it's not appropriate. Because I don't want people to think I'm taking advantage of you. Because the girls don't know you, and change is hard for them. Then we'll take it slow. But Rachel, look around this apartment. Look at your daughters. They deserve better than this, and you know it." Madison had been listening to the entire conversation with the focused attention of someone who understood that her life was about to change dramatically. "I think we should go with James," she said quietly. "Mia has been having bad dreams because of the scary sounds from downstairs. And Zoe asked me yesterday if we were going to have to start asking people for food again." The last statement hit both adults like a physical blow. "Again?" James asked. Madison nodded matter-of-factly. "When things got really bad last winter, Mommy taught us how to ask for leftover food from restaurants. She said it wasn't begging, it was just asking for help, and that sometimes people threw away good food that we could use." James closed his eyes, imagining Madison and her little sisters approaching strangers for scraps, learning to swallow their pride because hunger was stronger than shame. "That's never happening again," he said quietly. "Ever." Rachel was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as the weight of their circumstances was laid bare in front of the man she'd loved and lost. "I did the best I could," she whispered. "I tried so hard to give them a good life." "You did give them a good life," James said firmly. "You gave them love, stability, values, and each other. You kept them together when it would have been easier to give up. Rachel, you're an amazing mother. I'm a mother who had to teach her children to beg for food. You're a mother who taught her children to survive, to be resourceful, to look out for each other. Do you think Madison would be as mature and responsible as she is if she'd grown up with everything handed to her? Rachel looked at Madison, who was now helping Mia put on shoes, while Zoe woke up slowly on the couch. I suppose not. Those girls are incredible because of how you raised them, not despite it. But now they don't have to be so strong all the time. Now they get to just be kids. As the family gathered their few belongings, James understood that this was just the beginning. There would be lawyers to consult, paternity tests to confirm what they all knew, living arrangements to negotiate, and a relationship to rebuild with Rachel while forming new bonds with 3 daughters he'd never known existed. But looking at Madison as she helped her sisters pack their backpacks, seeing the hope beginning to replace fear in their eyes, and watching Rachel move through the small space with new purpose instead of defeated exhaustion, James Crawford realized that some things were worth upending your entire life for. The most important deal of his life wasn't happening in a boardroom. It was happening in a tiny apartment where a family was finally coming together. The penthouse elevator ride was silent, except for the twins' whispered amazement at the mirrored walls and soft classical music. James watched Rachel's reflection as she took in the opulence surrounding them, her expression unreadable, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap, revealing her nervousness. Madison stood straight-backed beside him, studying everything with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to assess new environments quickly. When the elevator opened directly into his foyer, all 3 girls went completely still. "This is where you live," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. The penthouse that James had called home for 8 years suddenly felt absurd through their eyes. The Italian marble floors stretched endlessly toward floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Central Park like a living painting. The furniture, custom pieces that had cost more than most people's annual salaries, looked like museum displays rather than places where real people lived and relaxed. "It's pretty empty, isn't it?" James said, suddenly seeing his home through their perspective. "I always thought it was elegant, but now I think it just looks lonely." Mia reached up to take his hand, her small fingers warm against his palm. "We can help make it less lonely. Madison's really good at making places feel like home." "I'd like that," James said, surprised by how much he meant it. Rachel had remained near the elevator as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to venture further into the space. "James, this is beautiful, but we can't stay here. It's too much." "Daum, Mom," Madison said, using the tone of a child who'd had to be reasonable with adults too many times. "Look at that kitchen. It has 2 ovens, and the refrigerator is bigger than our whole apartment. Zoe and Mia could actually have separate bedrooms." "We could have our own rooms." Zoe's eyes went wide. "Just for me and not sharing?" The innocent question broke James's heart all over again. Of course these children had never had their own space. Of course they'd grown up sleeping in the same room, sharing everything, never having a private moment or a place that was just theirs. "You can each have your own room," he promised. "With your own beds and your own decorations and space for all your things." "I don't have very many things," Mia said practically. "But I have a stuffed elephant that Daddy David gave me before he got sick. Could he have his own shelf?" The casual mention of David Martinez, the man who'd stepped up to be a father to Madison and had loved the twins as his own, reminded James that this situation was more complicated than a simple reunion. These children had a complex history, loyalties, and memories that he would need to respect and understand. "Your elephant can have the best shelf in the room," James assured her. "Can you tell me about Daddy David?" The twins' faces lit up immediately, and even Madison smiled for the first time since he'd met her. "He was the best," Zoe said earnestly. "He taught us how to make pancakes, and he read us stories every night, and he carried us on his shoulders to the park." "He loved Mommy so much," Mia added. Even when he got really sick, he still tried to help us with our homework, and he told us we should always take care of each other and Mommy." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "He was a good father to all of you, I hope. I hope you can understand that it's okay to love him and also let James be part of our family." Madison, who'd been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Daddy David said something to me before he died. I was only 6, but I remember it exactly." Everyone turned to look at her. "He said that someday my birth father might find us, and if he was a good man who wanted to love me, I should let him, because kids deserve to have as many people love them as possible." Madison looked directly at James. He said, "Love isn't like pie. It doesn't get smaller when you share it with more people." The wisdom of a 6-year-old, passed down by a dying man who'd loved her enough to prepare her for this exact moment, left James speechless. "David sounds like he was an incredible father," James said finally, "and he was right about love. I'm not trying to replace him. I could never do that. But if you'll let me, I'd like to add to the love you already have." Over the next hour, James gave them a tour of the penthouse, watching as the reality of their new temporary living situation sank in. The twins were fascinated by everything. The walk-in closets bigger than their former apartment, the bathroom with a separate shower and bathtub, the kitchen with gadgets they'd never seen before. Madison was more reserved, but he caught her running her hands along the marble countertops and staring out the windows with an expression of wonder she was trying hard to hide. Rachel remained quiet, clearly overwhelmed by the luxury, but also by the implications of accepting James's help. "I need to make some phone calls," James said eventually. "Rachel, there's medicine in the guest bathroom, and I stocked the kitchen with more food than we can eat in a week. Please make yourselves at home." "James," Rachel caught his arm as he headed toward his study. "We need to talk. About expectations, about how long this arrangement lasts, about everything." "We do. But first, let me take care of a few things. I need to clear my schedule for the next few days, and I want to arrange for a doctor to come check on you. I don't need—" "Rachel." His voice was gentle but firm. "You collapsed from exhaustion and haven't had proper medical care in who knows how long. Humor me." "Brad." As James settled into his study, he could hear the sounds he'd never experienced in his penthouse. Children's voices echoing in the large spaces, Rachel's laughter mixing with the twins' giggles as they explored, Madison's serious voice asking practical questions about how things worked. His first call was to his assistant. "Patricia, I need you to clear my calendar for the rest of the week. Sir, you have the Shanghai negotiation. Postpone it. And I need you to arrange for Dr. Williams to make a house call this evening. Also, I want you to research the best family law attorneys in the city. Specifically, someone who handles paternity cases and complex adoption situations. Mr. Crawford, is everything all right?" James looked through his study door toward the kitchen, where Madison was showing Zoe how to work the ice dispenser on his refrigerator, while Mia clapped with delight at each cube that fell. "Everything's perfect, Patricia." Different, complicated and perfect. His second call was to his lawyer, David Chang. "David, I need to ask you something confidentially. If I wanted to establish paternity for a child born 11 years ago, what would that process look like?" "James, is there something you haven't told me?" "There's a lot I haven't told anyone. But I may have a daughter I never knew about, and I need to understand my options for legal recognition and support." "That's quite a development. You'll need a paternity test first, obviously. Then we'd need to look at the existing custody situation, any legal fathers on record, and what kind of relationship you want to establish." I want full legal recognition." "And David?" "There are 2 other children involved. Not biologically mine, but part of the same family unit. I want to understand adoption possibilities there as well." "James, slow down. These are complex legal processes that take time. You can't just, I can do whatever is necessary to protect these children and give them the security they deserve, James interrupted. Get me the information I need, and let's start the process immediately. After hanging up, James sat in his study, listening to the sounds of his home being transformed. The penthouse that had been a showcase was becoming a place where children lived, laughed, and felt safe. Around 8 p.m., Dr. Williams arrived for the house call. James had used his personal physician for years, but had never asked him to treat children before. So these are the new additions to your household, Doctor? Williams asked quietly as they walked toward the living room, where the family was watching a movie on James's rarely used 75-inch television. It's complicated. Family usually is, Doctor. Williams's examination of Rachel revealed what James had suspected: severe exhaustion, malnutrition, and stress-related symptoms that had been building for months. The twins were underweight, but otherwise healthy, while Madison showed signs of chronic worry and premature responsibility that the doctor noted with concern. The children are resilient, Dr. Williams told James privately, but they've been under tremendous stress. The good news is that with proper nutrition, stability, and medical care, they should recover fully. The mother, however, needs serious rest and support. Whatever they need. I'm prescribed some vitamins and supplements for all of them. And James, that little girl, Madison, she's been carrying adult worries for too long. She needs to remember how to be a child. Later that night, after the girls were settled in bedrooms with more space than they'd ever had, James and Rachel finally had their long-overdue conversation. They sat on his balcony, overlooking Central Park, the lights of Manhattan stretching endlessly before them. "This feels like a dream," Rachel said quietly. "Earlier today, I was wondering how I was going to pay for groceries this week. Now my daughters are sleeping in beds that probably cost more than I made last year. How does that make you feel? Grateful, terrified, guilty, confused?" She turned to look at him. "James, I need you to understand something. I can't just be rescued. I can't just become some project where you fix my life because you feel responsible. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is. 11 years ago, we had 6 months together. We were different people then. You were trying to prove yourself to your father, and I was just trying to survive college while working full-time. Now you're one of the most powerful men in New York, and I'm a single mother who cleans offices for a living. Rachel, let me finish. I won't let my children grow up feeling like charity cases, and I won't let them get attached to a lifestyle that might disappear if you change your mind about all this." James was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think I'm going to change my mind? I think you're a good man who wants to do the right thing. But I also think you have no idea what you're signing up for. Raising children isn't a part-time hobby, James. It's 18 years minimum of putting someone else's needs before your own, of sleepless nights and endless worry and loving someone so much it physically hurts. You think I don't understand that? I think you've never had to choose between your career and a sick child's needs. I think you've never had to explain to a 7-year-old why you can't afford the field trip fee. I think you've never stood in a grocery store counting dollars and trying to decide between milk and bread because you can't afford both." Her words stung because they were true. "You're right. I haven't experienced those things, but I've experienced 11 years of wondering what happened to the woman I was falling in love with. I've experienced building a successful career and realizing it meant nothing because I had no one to share it with. James, I've experienced 11 years of regret, Rachel. Regret that I didn't fight harder to find you. Regret that I let my father's expectations matter more than my own happiness. Regret that I missed Madison's first word, her first steps, her first day of school, and every other milestone that I can never get back. Rachel was crying silently, tears streaming down her face in the dim light from the apartment. But most of all, James continued, I've regretted that I never got to tell you what you meant to me, what you still mean to me. What do I mean to you? You mean everything. You always have. The 6 months we had together were the happiest of my life, and every relationship since then has been measured against what we had. We barely knew each other. We knew enough. We knew that you made me laugh when nothing else could. We knew that I could talk to you about things I'd never shared with anyone. We knew that when we were together, everything else, all the pressure, all the expectations, all the noise, just disappeared. Rachel looked out over the city, processing his words. I felt it too. But James, feeling something and building a life together are very different things. Then let's build something together. Not because you need rescuing, and not because I feel guilty, but because we have 3 children who deserve the best of both of us. And us? What about us? James reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. I'd like to find out what happens when 2 people who loved each other get a second chance to do it right. It won't be easy. We're both different people now. Good different or bad different? Rachel smiled for the first time that evening. Complicated different. I can work with complicated. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle below them. Finally, Rachel spoke again. I have conditions. Name them. I want to contribute. I can't just live here as your dependent. I need to work, to pay my own way somehow. Agreed. We'll figure out how. I want the girls to understand that this isn't permanent unless we all decide it is. I won't let them get their hopes up only to be disappointed. Fair enough. And I want us to take things slowly. Between us, I mean. The girls need stability and consistency, not adults who are still figuring out their relationship. How slowly? Slowly enough that we're sure about what we're doing before we make any promises we can't keep. James nodded. Anything else? I want a paternity test. Not because I doubt Madison is yours, but because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. Legal, documented, and honest about everything. Already arranged. Dr. Williams will handle it discreetly. Rachel looked surprised. You work fast. I've spent 11 years moving slowly, Rachel. I don't want to waste any more time. As if summoned by their conversation, the apartment door opened, and Madison appeared in her pajamas, looking small and uncertain. I can't sleep, she said quietly. The bed is too big, and it's too quiet, and I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, and this will all be a dream. Rachel and James exchanged glances, both understanding exactly what she meant. Dreams could become reality, but they could also disappear as quickly as they came. Come here, sweetheart, Rachel said, making room on the outdoor furniture. Madison curled up between them, and James was struck by how right it felt, the 3 of them looking out over the city, planning a future that none of them could have imagined 24 hours earlier. Madison, James said gently, I want you to know that this isn't a dream. Tomorrow you'll still be here, and the day after that, and for as long as you want to be. Really? Even if you and Mommy fight sometimes? Even then, because families don't give up on each other just because things get complicated. Madison was quiet for a moment. Then, are we a family now? The question hung in the night air, loaded with hope and fear and possibilities that would change all their lives forever. James looked at Rachel, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, he said quietly, we're a family now. And for the first time in 11 years, James Crawford felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 weeks later, James Crawford sat in his office at 6 a.m., surrounded by legal documents he never thought he'd need to understand. Paternity test results, 99. 97% confirmation that Madison was his daughter. custody evaluation reports, family court procedures, educational enrollment forms for 3 children who'd never attended private school before. The paternity results hadn't surprised anyone, but seeing it in black and white had triggered a profound shift in James. This wasn't just about helping a family in need anymore. This was about his daughter, his blood, his responsibility. The adjustment period had been more challenging than he'd anticipated. Madison was mature, beyond her years, but still struggled with nightmares about their old apartment. The twins had moments of overwhelming excitement, followed by periods of withdrawal, as if they couldn't quite believe their new circumstances were real. And Rachel. Rachel was fighting him on nearly everything. "Mr. Crawford," his assistant Patricia's voice came through the intercom. "The family law attorney is here for your 7 a.m. appointment. Send her in." Margaret Thornton was exactly the kind of attorney James needed. Sharp, experienced in complex custody cases, and realistic about the challenges ahead. "James," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, "we need to discuss some complications. The paternity test confirms Madison is your daughter, but legally establishing your rights isn't straightforward." "What do you mean?" "David Martinez legally adopted Madison when he married Rachel. His name is on her birth certificate as her father. Even though he's deceased, that legal adoption doesn't automatically disappear just because biological paternity is established." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "So what are my rights?" "Legally, right now you have none. You're the biological father of a child who was legally adopted by another man. To establish parental rights, we'd need to petition the court to have the adoption overturned or modified. Can we do that?" "It's possible, but it's not simple. The court's primary concern is the best interest of the child. Given that Madison has lived with Rachel as her primary guardian and considered David Martinez her father for 7 years, a judge might question why changing that legal status is necessary." James leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "What about the twins? That's even more complex. You have no biological relationship to them, and they were also legally adopted by David Martinez. If you want to adopt them, you'd need Rachel's consent, but you'd also need to demonstrate that adoption is in their best interests, not just your desires." "This is ridiculous. They're living with me. I'm providing for them. We're functioning as a family. I understand your frustration, but family law moves slowly and carefully. The court has seen too many cases where well-meaning adults disrupt children's lives with good intentions, but poor execution." Margaret pulled out another folder. "There's something else. Rachel's employment situation is complicating things." "How so?" "She's been unemployed for 3 weeks since moving in with you. From a legal perspective, that could be seen as her becoming financially dependent on you, which raises questions about her ability to make independent decisions about the children's welfare." James frowned. "She's been focusing on getting the girls settled. We agreed she'd look for work once they adjusted to their new living situation." "I understand that, but perception matters in family court. A judge might wonder if Rachel is agreeing to changes in custody or adoption because she feels financially coerced." The conversation continued for another hour, each legal complexity adding weight to James's growing understanding that good intentions weren't enough to automatically create a family. The law existed to protect children, but it also meant that his path to legally protecting Madison and the twins would be long and uncertain. After Margaret left, James sat alone in his office, staring at Manhattan awakening outside his windows. His phone buzzed with the daily avalanche of messages, meeting requests, and urgent decisions that couldn't wait. But for the first time in his career, the business world felt secondary to the legal maze he needed to navigate. His private line rang, Madison calling from the penthouse. "James, is everything okay? You left really early this morning." The concern in his daughter's voice, his daughter, still caught him off guard every time. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I had some important meetings to arrange. How's your mum feeling today?" "Better. She made us pancakes for breakfast, and she didn't need to sit down halfway through cooking them." Madison paused. "James, are we going to be able to stay with you permanently?" The question he'd been dreading. "Why do you ask?" "Because last night I heard Mommy on the phone with someone, and she sounded worried. She kept saying things like, 'I don't know if this is sustainable, and what if he changes his mind about all this?'" James closed his eyes. Rachel was protecting herself and the girls the only way she knew how, by preparing for the possibility that this arrangement might not last. "Madison, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm never going to change my mind about taking care of you and your sisters, but there are some grown-up legal things we need to work through to make everything official." "What kind of legal things?" "And complicated things about adoption and custody, and making sure that if anything ever happened to me or your mum, you girls would always be safe and taken care of." Madison was quiet for a moment. "Is that why Mommy's been acting weird?" "What do you mean, weird?" "She keeps cleaning things that are already clean, and she won't let us kids touch anything expensive. Yesterday, Mia picked up one of your books, and Mommy made her put it down immediately and wash her hands. It's like she's afraid we're going to break something and you'll get mad." James felt his heart break a little more. Rachel was living like a guest in his home, afraid to fully settle in because she didn't trust that their place there was secure. "Madison, I want you and your sisters to treat this as your home. Touch things, use things, make noise, make messes. That's what families do. I'll tell Mommy you said that. Actually, let me talk to your mom about it. Is she there?" "She's helping Zoe with her reading homework. Hold on." James heard muffled conversation, then Rachel's voice, cautious and formal. "Good morning, James. I hope your meetings went well." "Rachel, we need to talk, not about legal stuff, about us. About how you've been feeling since you moved in." "I'm fine. The girls are adjusting well, and, Rachel, Madison tells me you won't let the girls touch my books, that you're cleaning things that don't need to be cleaned. That doesn't sound like someone who's comfortable in what I want to be your home." As the silence stretched so long, James wondered if the call had dropped. "It's hard," Rachel said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "James, 3 weeks ago, I was worried about how to pay for groceries. Now I'm living in a place that's worth more than I'll make in my entire lifetime. I don't know how to act, how to let the girls act. What if they break something irreplaceable? What if I make a mistake that ruins all this? What mistake could you possibly make? What if you decide this is too much work? What if the novelty of having a family wears off and you realize you prefer your quiet, organized life? What if I'm not the person you remember and you figure out that you don't actually want us here permanently?" James felt a rush of understanding. Rachel wasn't just protecting the girls from potential disappointment. She was protecting herself from a heartbreak she'd already lived through once. "Rachel, I want you to listen to me. 11 years ago, I lost you because other people made decisions for us. I'm not going to let that happen again. But what if? No what ifs. We're going to work through whatever challenges come up together. But first, I need you to stop living like a guest in your own home." That evening, James came home to find Rachel in the kitchen, preparing dinner with the careful precision of someone who was afraid to make a mess. The girls were at the dining table, working on homework with the kind of quiet concentration that suggested they'd been warned to be on their best behavior. "Hey, everyone," James said, loosening his tie. "How was your day?" "Good," the three girls chorused in voices that were a little too polite, a little too careful. James looked around the immaculate kitchen, then at Rachel's tense posture, and made a decision. "You know what? I think this kitchen is too clean." Everyone looked at him in surprise, Madison, want to help me make cookies? The kind where we get flour everywhere and don't worry about the mess? Madison's eyes lit up, but she glanced nervously at her mother. It's okay, Rachel said quickly. Just be careful not to— Rachel! James's voice was gentle but firm. Stop. This is their home. Our home. A little flour on the counters isn't going to hurt anything. What followed was the messiest, loudest, most chaotic evening the penthouse had ever witnessed. Flour ended up on the floor, chocolate chips were eaten directly from the bag, and Mia managed to get cookie dough in her hair. The twins shrieked with laughter when James deliberately dropped an egg, and Madison forgot to be mature and responsible for the first time since he'd met her. Rachel watched from the sidelines at first, but gradually began to relax as she realized that James wasn't going to become frustrated with the chaos. By the time they were all covered in flour and the kitchen looked like a bakery had exploded, she was laughing as hard as the children. "This is insane," she said, trying to wipe cookie dough off Zoe's cheek. "Your beautiful kitchen is destroyed." "Good," James said, pulling her into a hug that covered her work clothes with flour. "It looks like a family lives here now." Later that night, after the girls were in bed and the kitchen was somewhat restored to order, James and Rachel sat on the couch with cups of coffee and the last of the cookies they'd made. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," Rachel said. "About legal complications and making things official. And I want to do whatever it takes to make this permanent, not just for the girls, but for me too." She turned to look at him. "James, I'm falling in love with you again, not the you from 11 years ago, but the man you are now. The man who makes cookies with children and doesn't care about flour on his marble counters." James felt his heart race. "Rachel, but I'm also terrified. Because if we do this, if we really commit to building a life together and then it doesn't work out, it won't just be my heart that breaks. It'll be 3 little girls who've already lost one father. So, what do you need from me to feel secure about taking that risk?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I need to know that you understand what you're signing up for. I need to know that when Madison has her first teenage meltdown, you won't question whether this was all a mistake. I need to know that when Zoe brings home failing grades or Mia gets in trouble at school, you won't wish you'd stayed in your quiet, controlled life. And I need to know that when my business has a crisis and I have to work late nights for a week straight, you won't assume I'm choosing work over family. I need to know that when I make parenting mistakes, and I will, you won't use that as proof that I'm not cut out for this." They looked at each other, both understanding that they were negotiating the terms of not just a relationship, but a lifetime commitment to 3 children who deserve stability above all else. "So what do we do?" Rachel asked. "We take it one day at a time. We communicate about everything, even the uncomfortable stuff, and we remember that we're both learning how to be a family." "James? Yeah? I love you too. Present tense, not past tense." As James leaned over to kiss her, their first real kiss in 11 years, he heard the soft patter of small feet in the hallway. They broke apart to see Mia peeking around the corner, grinning at them. "Are you guys getting married now?" she asked with 7-year-old directness. Rachel blushed furiously, but James laughed. "What would you think if we did?" "I think it would be good. Then you'd be our daddy for real, not just for pretend." "I'm already your daddy for real, Mia. Marriage just makes it official." As Mia scampered back to bed, chattering excitedly to her sisters about weddings, James realized that the legal complexities, the adjustment period, and the challenges ahead didn't matter as much as the simple truth that this felt right. He had his family. Now he just had to figure out how to keep them. 2 months later, James received a call that would test every commitment he'd made to his new family. "James, we have a problem." David Chang, his lawyer, sounded grim. "Someone's challenging your fitness as a guardian." James stepped into his private office, closing the door behind him. It was Saturday afternoon, and the girls were in the living room building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions while Rachel read nearby. Their laughter echoed through the penthouse, the sound of children who finally felt secure enough to just be children. What kind of challenge? A formal complaint has been filed with Child Protective Services, alleging that you're providing an unstable environment for 3 minors. The complaint cites concerns about your work schedule, the unconventional living arrangements, and questions about the children's welfare. James felt ice form in his stomach. Who filed the complaint? It's anonymous, but James, it contains information that could only come from someone with access to your personal schedule and corporate activities, someone who knows about your recent absences from board meetings and the Shanghai deal delays. The implication was clear. Someone from his own company was trying to use his newfound family against him. What does this mean for the girls? CPS has to investigate any formal complaint. They'll want to interview the children separately, inspect the living arrangements, and assess the stability of the household. Given that you're not legally recognized as Madison's father yet, and you have no legal claim to the twins at all, they could be removed from my custody. It's possible. Rachel has legal custody, but if CPS determines that her living situation is unstable or that she's unable to provide adequate care independently of you, they could recommend alternative arrangements. James looked through his office door at his family, Madison helping Zoe balance a pillow on top of their fort, while Mia directed the construction with the authority of a tiny architect. 3 weeks ago, he'd watched Madison have her first genuine belly laugh since he'd known her, triggered by Mia's impression of their doorman. These children were finally healing from years of insecurity and fear. When is the investigation? Monday morning. James, you need to understand something. This isn't just about whether you're providing good care for these children. Someone is questioning your judgment as a CEO, using your family as evidence that you've become distracted and unreliable. After David hung up, James sat alone in his office, processing the new threat to his family's stability. Through the wall, he could hear Rachel helping the girls clean up their fort, her voice patient and warm as she negotiated the complex social dynamics of 3 children sharing space. She'd made tremendous progress over the past 2 months. The frightened, exhausted woman he'd found in that tiny apartment had gradually been replaced by someone who laughed more, worried less, and was slowly beginning to believe that their new life might actually be permanent. Now, he had to tell her that everything they'd built might be at risk again. James? Rachel appeared in the doorway of his study, concern written across her face. Everything okay? You've been in here for an hour. We need to talk. All of us. Gathering the family in the living room, James explained the situation as gently as possible. The girls listened with the serious attention of children who'd learned that adult problems could dramatically affect their lives. So, someone called the kid police on us? Mia asked, her 7-year-old's interpretation cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Someone called social services to check on you, yes. But why? Zoe's voice was small. We're not being hurt. We have food and our own beds, and James helps us with homework. Sometimes adults make complaints when they don't understand a situation, Rachel said carefully, or when they're worried about children. Madison, who'd been quiet throughout the explanation, finally spoke up. It's because of work, isn't it? Someone thinks James is choosing us over his company. The perceptiveness of his almost 11-year-old daughter still caught James off guard. Madison, I want you to understand something. I will always choose my family over everything else, but some people at my company don't understand that. What happens if the social workers think we shouldn't live here? Madison's question was asked with the careful tone of someone who'd learned to prepare for the worst. That won't happen, James said firmly. But we need to be ready to show them that we're a real family, that you're safe and loved and cared for here. We are safe here, Zoe said earnestly. This is the first place I've ever lived where I wasn't scared of loud noises from other apartments. And James makes the best pancakes, Mia added, as if this was definitive proof of good parenting. That evening, as they prepared for the investigation, James realized how much their lives had changed in just 2 months. The girls' bedrooms were now filled with books, toys, and artwork. The refrigerator was covered with spelling tests, drawings, and photographs of family outings. The sterile penthouse had been transformed into a home where children lived and thrived, but he also realized how vulnerable their happiness was to outside forces that didn't understand or value what they'd built together. Sunday night, as he tucked the twins into bed, Mia grabbed his hand. "James, if the kid police decide we can't live here anymore, will you still be our daddy?" The question broke his heart. "Mia, no matter what happens, no matter where any of us live, I will always be your daddy, always." "Promise?" "I promise." Monday morning brought Sarah Walsh from Child Protective Services, along with a colleague and a court-appointed child advocate. James watched from his study as they transformed his living room into an interview space, setting up recording equipment and establishing separate areas for private conversations with each family member. The process was both thorough and invasive. Ms. Walsh interviewed each girl separately, asking detailed questions about their daily routines, their relationship with James and Rachel, their feelings about their living situation, and whether they felt safe and cared for. Madison handled the interview with typical maturity, articulating clearly why she wanted to stay with James and Rachel. The twins were more emotional, with Zoe crying when asked if she missed her old apartment and Mia repeatedly asking if they'd done something wrong. The child advocate, a woman named Dr. Jennifer Martinez, spent significant time observing the family's natural interactions. She watched James help with homework, observed Rachel managing the complex logistics of 3 children's schedules, and noted how the girls interacted with each other and their caregivers. "Mr. Crawford," Ms. Walsh said during her interview with James, "the anonymous complaint raises concerns about your ability to maintain consistent involvement in these children's lives, given your professional responsibilities. How do you respond to suggestions that your commitment to this family might be temporary?" "Ms. Walsh, 2 months ago, I didn't know I had a daughter. Since then, I've restructured my entire life around being a present father. I've changed my work schedule, modified my travel commitments, and made decisions that have cost my company significant revenue. All because these children needed stability and love. But your work situation remains demanding. What happens when business pressures conflict with family needs?" James looked through the doorway at Rachel, who was helping Zoe with a puzzle while Madison read to Mia on the couch. The scene that had become his favorite part of every day, the quiet, domestic chaos that meant he was no longer alone in the world. "Ms. Walsh, I've learned something important over the past 2 months. Business success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. These children have taught me what's actually valuable in life. If my company can't accommodate my priorities as a father, then I'll find other ways to support my family." The investigation continued for 3 hours. Dr. Martinez observed bedtime routines, examined the children's living spaces, and spent significant time talking to Rachel about her parenting approach and her perspective on the family's stability. When it was over, Ms. Walsh packed up her equipment with an unreadable expression. "We'll have our report completed within the week," she told James. "In the meantime, there are no restrictions on the current living arrangements." After the investigators left, the family gathered in the living room, emotionally exhausted from the scrutiny. "How did we do?" Madison asked, ever the responsible one. "You were all perfect," Rachel assured her. "You told the truth about how you feel, and that's all we could ask for. When will we know if we can stay? Zoe wanted to know. Soon, sweetheart. That afternoon, James's phone rang. Robert Harrison, the board chairman. James, we need to talk. Today, my office. An hour later, James sat across from Harrison and 3 other board members, including Victoria Sterling, whose expression suggested she was enjoying the drama. James, Harrison began, we've received some troubling information about your recent family situation. From whom? That's not important. What matters is that your personal decisions are starting to affect your professional responsibilities and the company's reputation. How so? Sterling leaned forward. You've missed 17 board meetings in 2 months. You postponed the Shanghai acquisition, costing us millions in delays. And now there are questions about your judgment and stability being raised by Child Protective Services. Questions that were raised by someone in this room, I'm guessing. The silence confirmed his suspicion. James, Harrison said, we're concerned about your ability to lead this company while managing your new domestic responsibilities. Are you asking me to choose between my family and my job? We're asking you to consider what's best for Crawford Industries. James stood up, his decision crystallizing. What's best for Crawford Industries is having a CEO who understands what really matters in life. What's best for this company is having leadership that values people over profits. James, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. For the first time in my adult life, I'm being completely reasonable. James moved toward the door. You have until tomorrow morning to decide whether Crawford Industries wants a CEO who's also a devoted father, or whether you want to find someone else to run the company my family built. You're threatening to resign over this? James paused at the door. I'm not threatening anything. I'm telling you that my family is non-negotiable. If this board can't accept that, then we don't have compatible values, and you should find a new CEO. As James left the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Daddy, Mia drew you a picture to make you feel better about the social worker visit. It's a drawing of our whole family, including you. She wrote, Best Daddy Ever at the bottom. Walking toward the elevator, James Crawford realized he'd already won the only victory that mattered. Everything else was just details. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning that would change everything. James, it's Sarah Walsh from Child Protective Services. I wanted to give you the news personally before you receive the official report. James was instantly awake, Rachel stirring beside him as he sat up in bed. What's the decision? Our investigation found no evidence of neglect, abuse, or inappropriate care. In fact, Mr. Crawford, in 15 years of child welfare work, I've rarely seen children who've shown such dramatic positive changes in such a short time period. James felt his entire body relax. So they can stay. More than that, our report will recommend that the court expedite your paternity recognition for Madison and approve your petition to adopt Zoe and Mia, assuming all parties consent. Doctor. Martinez's psychological evaluation noted that all 3 children demonstrate strong attachment to you and that separating them from your care would likely cause significant emotional trauma. After Ms. Walsh hung up, James shared the news with Rachel, who burst into tears of relief and joy. They'd done it. They'd proven that love, commitment, and stability mattered more than conventional family structures or anonymous complaints. But their celebration was interrupted by another call, this one from David Chang. James, I have news about the anonymous CPS complaint. We traced it back to its source. Who was it? Victoria Sterling. Apparently, she's been building a case to have you removed as CEO, using your family situation as evidence of compromised judgment and leadership. James felt anger rise in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by something more powerful: determination. David, I need you to prepare documentation for something. What kind of documentation? I'm going to make Victoria Sterling an offer she can't refuse. At 2 p.m. that same day, the Crawford Industries Board convened for an emergency meeting. James entered the boardroom carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression that made even Victoria Sterling look nervous. Ladies and gentlemen, James began, not bothering to sit down, we have some business to conclude. He placed a document on the table in front of each board member. What you're looking at is my resignation letter, effective immediately, along with my recommendation that the board begin a search for my replacement. The room erupted in shocked voices, but James continued calmly. However, you'll notice that the resignation is conditional. It goes into effect only if this board votes to censure my personal decisions regarding my family or attempts to use my role as a father as grounds for questioning my professional capabilities. Robert Harrison was reading rapidly through the document. James, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we settle this once and for all. If this board believes that having a family makes me unfit to lead Crawford Industries, then vote to accept my resignation. I'll start my own company, taking several key clients and probably half your best employees with me. Victoria Sterling's face had gone pale. You can't be serious. Ms. Sterling, I've never been more serious about anything in my life. James fixed her with a steady gaze. Particularly since I know you filed the anonymous CPS complaint against my family. The silence in the room was deafening. James, Harrison said carefully, how do you know that? Because I had it traced, and because Ms. Sterling made a critical error. She included information in her complaint that was discussed in a confidential board meeting, information that only someone in this room would have known. Sterling stood up abruptly. You can't prove that. Actually, I can. And I'm prepared to file harassment charges against you personally and a lawsuit against Crawford Industries for allowing a board member to use confidential company information to harass employees' families. James opened his portfolio and pulled out another set of documents, which brings me to my second proposal. Miss Sterling, you have a choice. You can resign from this board immediately with the recommendation that no other major corporation employ you in a governance role, or I can pursue legal action that will make your involvement in harassing 3 children a matter of public record. Sterling looked around the room, clearly hoping for support from the other board members. She found none. This is extortion. No, Ms. Sterling, this is consequences. You used your position on this board to attack my family. You filed false reports with Child Protective Services that could have resulted in 3 children being removed from a loving home. You did this not out of concern for their welfare, but because you wanted to damage my reputation and position in this company. Harrison cleared his throat. Victoria, is this true? Sterling's silence was answer enough. In that case, Harrison continued, I think we need to take a vote, all in favor of accepting Ms. Sterling's resignation from the board, effective immediately. The vote was unanimous. As Sterling gathered her things and left the boardroom in humiliated silence, James turned back to the remaining board members. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. I have 3 children who depend on me, a woman I plan to marry, and family responsibilities that will sometimes affect my work schedule. If this board cannot accept that I'm no longer a man who lives for nothing but corporate profits, then accept my resignation and find someone else. James, Harrison said slowly, I think I speak for the remaining board when I say that your personal life is your own business. What we care about is results, and your results speak for themselves. Even if it means I leave the office by 6 p.m. most days and spend weekends with my family, instead of in strategy meetings? James, You've increased company profits by 40% over the past 2 years. If you can continue doing that while maintaining work-life balance, more power to you." James smiled. "Then I'd like to withdraw my conditional resignation. But I want it on record that Crawford Industries supports its executives' family commitments." "Agreed." As the meeting concluded, James realized that the confrontation he'd been dreading had actually freed him. He no longer had to choose between career success and family happiness. He'd proven that excellence in one area could enhance rather than diminish the other. That evening, James came home to find chaos in the penthouse, the good kind of chaos that meant his family felt completely comfortable in their space. Mia had set up an art project on the dining room table, covering the expensive wood surface with paint and glitter. Zoe was practicing piano, filling the apartment with slightly off-key but enthusiastic music. Madison was sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by homework and books. Rachel emerged from the kitchen, wearing one of his old college t-shirts and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nothing like the polished corporate wives he'd met at business functions, and she was absolutely perfect. "How did the board meeting go?" she asked, moving into his arms for a welcome home kiss that still made his heart race. Victoria Sterling resigned. "Good. I never liked her anyway." "How did you even know Victoria Sterling?" Rachel grinned. "I've been cleaning Crawford Industries on weekends for 3 years, remember? I've seen all your board members in action during their late-night meetings. Trust me, Sterling was always the most obnoxious." "Any other insights about my board you'd like to share?" "Harrison's actually a decent guy who genuinely cares about the company. Peterson drinks too much coffee and leaves his trash everywhere. And Williams has been having an affair with his secretary for at least 2 years. James laughed, realizing that Rachel knew more about the inner workings of his company than most of his executives did. "Daddy!" Mia came running, covered head to toe in glitter and paint. "Look what I made for you!" She held up a painting that was mostly abstract swirls of color, but James could make out what appeared to be 5 stick figures holding hands. "It's our family," she explained. "That's you and Mommy and me and Zoe and Madison. We're all holding hands because we love each other. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we hang it in your office so everyone at work knows you have a family?" James looked at the painting, undoubtedly the most unprofessional artwork that had ever been considered for display in the CEO's office of a major corporation. "Absolutely. It'll go right behind my desk." Later that night, after the girls were asleep and Rachel was grading homework at the kitchen table, she'd started taking education courses and volunteering at their school, James stood on his balcony, looking out over Manhattan. A year ago, his life had been perfectly ordered, entirely predictable and completely empty. He'd measured success by stock prices and quarterly reports, attended social functions where he knew no one's real name, and gone to bed each night in silence. Now his home was filled with the sounds of children growing up, homework debates, bedtime stories, and the occasional argument over who got the last piece of pizza. His expensive furniture bore the marks of family life, crayon marks on the coffee table, paint stains on the couch, and photographs covering every available surface. His phone buzzed with a text from Madison, who was supposed to be asleep. "Thank you for fighting for us today. I heard you talking to Mommy about the board meeting. You're the best daddy in the world." James smiled, understanding that he'd finally learned the difference between being successful and being significant. 6 months later, James Crawford married Rachel Santos in a small ceremony in Central Park, with 3 flower girls who argued over who got to throw the most petals. The adoption papers for all 3 children were finalized the following week. The Crawford Industries board sent an engagement gift, a crystal vase that Mia accidentally broke 3 days after the wedding. When James laughed instead of getting upset, Rachel knew beyond any doubt that they were going to be okay. Madison, now 11, and in advanced classes at one of Manhattan's best schools, occasionally asked James if he missed his old life. His answer was always the same. "Sweetheart, I didn't have a life before. I just had a career." Because James Crawford had learned the most important lesson of all, that love multiplies when you share it, that families are built on choice as much as biology, and that sometimes the best things in life come from a desperate phone call at 11:47 p.m. from a child who's brave enough to ask for help. The Shanghai deal eventually closed successfully, with James bringing his family to the celebration dinner. The Singapore partners were so impressed by his ability to balance professional excellence with personal priorities that they offered him additional projects. And every morning when James woke up to the sound of his daughters getting ready for school, Rachel making coffee in their kitchen, and the comfortable chaos of a family starting their day together, he remembered that the most important call he'd ever answered hadn't been from a business partner or board member. It had been from Madison, asking for help and calling him Daddy for the first time. Some victories James had learned were worth more than all the companies in the world.